I didn't go looking for proof. That's the part people always get wrong. I wasn't suspicious enough to snoop, wasn't angry enough to accuse, wasn't insecure enough to dig. I thought we were fine. Not perfect, but fine in the way long marriages settle into something quieter. Then her phone lit up on the counter, and everything I believed about my life shifted in a single second. Before I go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? Because what you're about to hear isn't about drama. It's about the moment certainty breaks. It was an ordinary night. Dishes half done, the TV murmuring to itself, the kind of evening you forget as soon as it passes. She was in the shower. Her phone buzzed once, sharp against the granite, the screen lighting the kitchen like a flare. I wasn't even close to it at first. I noticed the sound before the glow. Then I saw the name. Evan. Not a nickname. Not a coworker. Her ex. The one she said she hadn't spoken to in years. The one whose name I hadn't heard since early in our marriage, back when we still told each other everything. The screen didn't hide it. The preview line sat there, clear and current. Not an old thread resurfacing. Not a missed call from a distant past. It was now. Active. Alive. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. The message was enough. Enough to make my chest tighten. Enough to make the room feel suddenly smaller. Enough to tell me this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't nostalgia. This was ongoing. I stood there longer than I realized, staring at that glowing rectangle like it might change if I waited. It didn't. The words stayed. And with them came a cold understanding that I hadn't been invited into part of my own marriage for a long time. When she came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped tight, steam following her like a cover story, she smiled at me. A normal smile. The same one she used every day. And that was when it hit me hardest. She had no idea I knew. She was comfortable. Settled. Practiced. We ate dinner like nothing had happened. She talked about her day. I nodded at the right moments. I even laughed once, and the sound surprised me. It didn't sound fake. It sounded distant. Like it came from somewhere behind glass. I kept watching her hands, her face, the way she checked her phone face down between bites, careful not to let it light up again. Every small detail felt louder than it should have. The clink of silverware. The hum of the refrigerator. The way she avoided my eyes when the phone buzzed again, softer this time. I wondered how long this had been happening. I wondered how many nights like this I'd already lived through without knowing. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had gone very still. I wanted to understand the shape of the lie before I touched it. I wanted to see how she carried it when she thought I wasn't looking. That night, lying in bed beside her, I stared at the ceiling while she slept. Or pretended to. Her breathing was steady. Familiar. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt rehearsed. I thought about the message again. About the way his name appeared without hesitation, like it belonged there. About the confidence in the timing. People don't text like that unless they're certain of the response. In the dark, I started replaying the last few months. The late evenings. The sudden need for privacy. The way her phone never left her side anymore. At the time, I'd called it stress. Work. Life. I'd told myself not to overthink it. Now every memory rearranged itself into a pattern I didn't want to see. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye like she always did. Quick. Warm. Unremarkable. Then she left, and the house felt hollow in a way I couldn't ignore. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after the door closed, staring at the counter where her phone had been the night before. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't going to end with shouting. It was going to end with clarity. I spent the day doing nothing that mattered and thinking about everything that did. I decided I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to play detective. I already had the truth. What I needed next was to see how she defended it. When she came home that evening, she was lighter than she'd been in weeks. Humming. Relaxed. She set her bag down and asked what I wanted for dinner. The normalcy of it almost made me doubt myself. Almost. Then her phone vibrated again, and she flipped it over without looking, just a little too quickly. I asked her to sit with me. Not, we need to talk. Not a warning. Just a request. She looked surprised, then annoyed, then curious. She sat across from me at the table, folding her hands like this was a meeting she hadn't scheduled. I told her what I saw. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I said his name. I said when the message came in. I said what it said. I watched her face as I spoke, watched the exact moment denial formed, like a reflex she'd practiced in the mirror. She said I misunderstood. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said it was complicated. Each sentence came faster than the last, like if she stacked them high enough, one of them would hold. I let her talk. Silence can be a mirror if you let it. When the denial ran out, she minimized. She said it didn't mean anything. That it was just talking. That I was blowing it out of proportion. I asked her one question, calmly, and watched her avoid it. That told me more than an answer ever could. Then came the explanations. Loneliness. Feeling unseen. Old habits resurfacing. She didn't apologize. She explained. And that was the moment something in me clicked into place. I told her I wasn't going to compete. Not with him. Not with anyone. I told her I wasn't interested in being an option or a fallback or a phase she outgrew. I told her that whatever she was reaching for, she'd already reached past me to get it. She stared at me like she'd expected anger and found certainty instead. It unsettled her. I could see it. Control depends on reaction, and I wasn't giving her one. She stood up slowly, like the room had tilted. She said she needed space. She said she needed time to think. She said she didn't know what she wanted anymore. All of it sounded prepared. All of it sounded like an exit. She packed that night. Not in a rush. Not in tears. With careful movements, choosing what to take like she'd rehearsed the order. I stayed in the living room while she moved through the house, the sound of drawers opening and closing marking time. When she came back with her bag, she paused at the door. For a second, I thought she might say something real. She didn't. The door closed softly behind her, and the quiet that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I stood there alone, the house suddenly unfamiliar, and realized that seeing that message hadn't ended my marriage. It had just exposed how long it had already been over. And the part one didn't know yet, the part that would change how I understood everything, was what she would do next once the silence stopped protecting her. The first night alone felt unreal. Not dramatic, just wrong, like a room after the furniture's been moved but the dust hasn't settled yet. I kept expecting her footsteps in the hallway, the soft click of her phone charging on the nightstand. Instead, there was nothing. Silence has a way of amplifying thoughts you've been postponing. I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the conversation, the order of her defenses, the way explanation replaced apology. I wondered how long it takes to practice that. I wondered how many versions of that speech she'd already run through with someone else. Those questions didn't hurt the way I expected. They hardened into something steadier, something that didn't wobble when I leaned on it. By morning, my phone buzzed. A text from her. Short. Careful. I need a few days. No question mark. No invitation to respond. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then set the phone down without answering. If you've ever been here, you know the impulse, to clarify, to soften, to reach. I didn't. Not because I was strong. Because I was done pretending confusion was love. What would you have done right then? Reply immediately, or wait and see who fills the silence? Comment below. I'm curious, because that choice tells you who you think has the power. The house took on a strange rhythm after that. Coffee tasted the same. The shower ran at the same pressure. Everything worked. And yet every object felt like it had been reassigned. Her mug stayed where she'd left it. The throw blanket still smelled like her shampoo. I didn't move anything. I wanted to see how long the past would sit there on its own. On the second day, I started noticing the gaps. Messages she used to send that never came. The way my evenings opened up like blank pages. I filled them with walks, with long drives, with staring at nothing in particular. I wasn't avoiding the pain. I was letting it show me its edges. Then my phone buzzed again. Not her. A notification preview I didn't recognize, sliding into view like it owned the place. Same name. Evan. Different app. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to consider yet. This wasn't contained. It wasn't limited to one conversation, one lapse, one bad decision explained away by timing. It was a system. Multiple doors, all unlocked. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. The fact that it arrived, now, here, after she'd left, was the reveal. Whatever boundaries I thought existed had been crossed long before the night in the kitchen. The silence hadn't ended anything. It had just changed who it protected. That afternoon, she called. I let it ring. Then she called again. I watched the name flash and disappear, until the phone went quiet. A minute later, a voicemail. I didn't play it. There are some sounds you can hear without pressing play. The third day, she showed up. No warning. No text. I heard the knock and knew who it was before I reached the door. She stood there with that same careful posture, shoulders set, face arranged into something neutral. She looked tired. Not regretful. Tired. I just want to talk, she said. I stepped aside. Not as an invitation, more like an acknowledgement. She walked in and stopped, as if the space itself had changed allegiance. She looked around, noticing the stillness she'd left behind. For a second, it looked like it unsettled her. She started with how hard the last few days had been. How confused she felt. How everything had gotten away from her. I listened. I always had. The difference now was that I wasn't trying to fix the story as she told it. I was letting it land where it wanted. When she paused, I asked her one question. Not about him. Not about the messages. About timing. How long? I said. She hesitated. Just long enough. That doesn't matter, she said. It mattered. Her refusal was the answer. She tried again, softer this time. She said she hadn't planned for it to go this far. That it started as talking. That she didn't know how to stop once it did. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me. I believe you, I said. She looked relieved, like that sentence had done its job. I believe you didn't mean to, I continued. I don't believe you didn't know. That changed the room. She shifted in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs, searching for a version of the conversation where she could still be centered. She asked if we could try counseling. She asked if I could give her time. She asked if I'd be willing to start over. I told her the truth. That starting over requires an ending. That what she wanted was a pause button. That I wasn't interested in living between chapters while someone else wrote ahead. She stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. Like standing meant control. So what, you're just done? She asked. I didn't answer right away. Not to be dramatic. To be precise. I'm done pretending I don't see what's in front of me, I said. Her jaw tightened. She nodded, once, as if to herself. Then she said the thing people say when they're about to leave a conversation they no longer own. I can't do this, she said. And just like that, the script flipped. She wasn't asking anymore. She was declaring. She picked up her bag, the same one she'd packed before, and walked toward the door like the decision had always been hers. I didn't follow her. I didn't stop her. I let the door close again, softly, the way it had the first time. And in the quiet that followed, something else arrived. Not relief. Not triumph. Understanding. The phone buzzed minutes later. A message from her this time. Longer. Emotional. Carefully worded. I didn't open it. I set the phone down and made coffee instead. Steam rose. The kitchen filled with a familiar smell. Life, stubborn as ever, kept moving. If you're still with me, let me ask you this, what would you do with the message you know will pull you backward? Read it, or protect the distance you finally earned? Say it in the comments. I won't judge. I've been on both sides of that choice. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because things were resolved. Because they were no longer ambiguous. Ambiguity is exhausting. Truth, even when it hurts, has a shape you can work around. I woke up to sunlight and a quiet house and realized the next phase had already started. The part where the past tests whether you mean what you didn't say out loud. The part where silence stops being empty and starts being a boundary. And the part one didn't see coming, the part that would complicate everything, was how quickly people try to rewrite what exposure makes undeniable. The story didn't spread the way gossip usually does. There were no dramatic leaks, no public scenes. It moved quietly, like fog, seeping into places I didn't realize were connected. A mutual friend asked how I was doing and paused too long after I said, fine. A coworker mentioned seeing her out and then quickly changed the subject. People knew something. They just didn't know what to call it yet. That's when the rewriting began. It started with small messages. Not from her, at first, but from people who meant well. She's having a hard time. This is complicated. You both made mistakes. The language softened the edges until accountability blurred into weather. I didn't argue. I let the words pass through me without catching. If you've ever tried to correct a narrative while it's forming, you know how quickly you become the problem. A week later, she sent another message. This one shorter. Direct. Can we talk? No apology. No acknowledgement. Just an invitation to resume a conversation that no longer existed. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, and felt the pull, habit masquerading as hope. I didn't reply. Not yet. I wanted to see what came next when silence refused to cooperate. Before I tell you what happened after that, answer this. Do you believe closure comes from conversation, or from distance? Drop a comment. I used to think I knew the answer. I was wrong. 2 days passed. Then 3. On the 4th, she showed up again. This time, she didn't knock. She texted from the driveway. I'm outside. No question mark. I waited a full minute before opening the door. When I did, she stood there with a different energy. Less defensive. More careful. The kind of calm that comes from rehearsing what you're about to say and believing it will land. She didn't step inside. She talked from the threshold, like the house itself had drawn a line. I've been thinking a lot, she said. About us. I nodded. That was all. She talked about how exposed she felt. How things had spiraled faster than she expected. How she'd felt judged by my silence. That one almost made me laugh, but I didn't. Silence isn't judgment. It's a mirror. People don't like what they see in it. She finally said his name out loud. Evan. As if naming him would control the size of what he represented. She said it wasn't what it looked like. Again. She said she'd ended it. That this time, she really meant it. The words came quickly, like she was racing a clock only she could see. I asked her when. She said, recently. I asked her how recently. She didn't answer. That was enough. She reached for my hand then, a familiar gesture repurposed for a different outcome. I stepped back. Not dramatically. Just enough to make the distance visible. Her eyes flickered. Surprise, then frustration, then something close to anger. So you're just going to punish me? She asked. No, I said. I'm going to be consistent. That seemed to confuse her more than any accusation could have. She wanted emotion. Reaction. Something to push against. Consistency offers nothing to grab. She shifted tactics. Said she missed me. Said she missed how we used to talk. Said she was willing to do the work. Therapy. Transparency. Whatever it took. The promises were stacked carefully, each one designed to sound like progress. I told her I believed she meant them. She exhaled, relief flickering across her face. But, I added, meaning them now doesn't change choosing otherwise then. The relief vanished. I explained, calmly, that trust isn't rebuilt by declarations. It's rebuilt by time without contradiction. And that time doesn't start while the door is still open to negotiation. I told her I wasn't closing the door to be cruel. I was closing it to stop bleeding. She looked past me into the house, like she expected to see a version of our life still waiting to be reclaimed. There wasn't one. The furniture was the same. The air wasn't. She nodded once, tight-lipped, and turned away. This time, she didn't look back. That night, the message finally came. Not from her. From him. A single line. Casual. Familiar. Too familiar. I didn't open it. I set the phone down and stared at the wall, understanding something new and unwelcome. Ending a relationship doesn't end its orbit. People don't disappear when the truth shows up. They test the edges to see if the old rules still apply. I blocked the number. It felt final in a way words never do. The days that followed were quieter, but not easier. I noticed how often my mind tried to bargain. If I'd said this differently. If I'd waited longer. If I'd reacted sooner. Each thought arrived dressed as responsibility and left feeling like regret. I stopped entertaining them. Regret feeds on hypotheticals. Friends checked in. Some offered advice. Some offered distraction. I accepted neither. I needed to feel the shape of my life without the noise. I needed to learn what it sounded like when I wasn't explaining myself. One evening, scrolling absently, I saw a photo she'd posted. Nothing dramatic. A drink. A caption about clarity. The comments were supportive. Affirming. The story was already rewriting itself, and I recognized my old role in it, the quiet absence people fill with assumptions. I closed the app. Here's the part no one prepares you for. When you don't chase, when you don't argue, when you don't defend your version, the world assumes you're fine. They don't see the work it takes to hold a line without turning it into a wall. A week later, she sent one last message. Longer than the others. Thoughtful. Reflective. She said she understood now. That she was sorry for the hurt she caused. That she hoped someday we could talk without all this between us. I read it. Then I set the phone down and didn't respond. Not because she didn't deserve a reply. Because I did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. It made room for something I hadn't felt in a long time, direction. But the story wasn't done testing me yet. Because closure has a way of arriving disguised as opportunity. And the next thing that happened forced me to decide whether boundaries were something I practiced, or something I preached. The opportunity came quietly, the way real tests always do. It didn't announce itself as temptation. It arrived as something reasonable. Familiar. Almost generous. Her message showed up late one evening, weeks after the last silence had settled into something livable. No drama. No emotion spilling over the edges. Just a question that looked harmless if you didn't know its history. Can we meet? Just to talk. No expectations. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Not because I missed her. Because part of me wanted to prove, to myself, to the invisible jury in my head, that I was strong enough to face it now. That I could sit across from her without reopening anything. That closure could be scheduled like a coffee break. I almost said yes. I even typed the reply. My thumb hovered over the send button while my mind raced ahead, already staging the conversation. Calm voices. Mature words. Mutual understanding. The version of us that never quite existed, finally getting a scene. I put the phone down instead. Because that's the trick closure plays. It promises relief, but it charges interest. And I'd already paid enough. Before I tell you what I did next, let me ask you something. If someone who hurt you asked for one last conversation, would you go to prove you're over it, or stay away to prove you are? Drop your answer in the comments. I didn't know mine until that moment. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a walk. The city was quiet, the air cool, the kind of morning that doesn't demand anything from you. With each step, the urge to explain myself faded a little more. I realized something then that hadn't fully formed before. I didn't owe her my understanding. I'd already given it, over and over, while she chose something else. When I got home, I finally responded. Not with an argument. Not with conditions. One sentence. Clear. Kind. Finished. I'm not meeting. I wish you well. I sent it before I could revise it into something softer, something that would reopen the door just enough to feel polite. The message delivered. No typing bubbles followed. No immediate response. Just quiet. That afternoon, a mutual friend called. Carefully. Like they were stepping onto thin ice. They said she was struggling. That she felt embarrassed. That she was trying to figure out how to move forward. I listened. I said I was sorry she was having a hard time. And then I changed the subject. It felt strange at first, refusing to carry weight that used to feel like my responsibility. But the longer I did it, the lighter everything became. Days passed. Then weeks. The narrative out there continued to evolve without me. Some people assumed I'd shut down. Others assumed I was heartless. A few, quietly, told me they understood more than they could say out loud. I learned to let all of it exist without correcting it. The truth doesn't need a press release. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. I recognized the tone before I recognized the words. It was him. Not apologetic. Not aggressive. Just casual. Like time had erased context. Like he was checking whether the rules had reset. I didn't reply. I blocked the number and went back to stirring the pot, realizing something important in that small, ordinary moment. Boundaries aren't dramatic when they work. They're boring. Efficient. Invisible to anyone who isn't trying to cross them. That night, I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that doesn't require exhaustion to earn. The kind that comes when your mind isn't running simulations anymore. In the weeks that followed, life didn't transform overnight. There was no montage. No sudden happiness. Just space. And in that space, things started arranging themselves naturally. I reconnected with people I'd neglected without realizing it. I picked up routines I'd abandoned because they didn't fit neatly into someone else's schedule. I noticed how often I'd minimized my own discomfort to keep conversation smooth. How often I'd chosen peacekeeping over honesty. Losing the marriage hurt. But staying would have cost me something quieter and harder to recover. Months later, I ran into her unexpectedly. A grocery store aisle. Fluorescent lights. Carts passing like nothing had ever happened. She looked different. Not worse. Just separate. We exchanged polite words. Brief. Neutral. She asked how I was. I'm good, I said. And I meant it. She hesitated, like she might say more. Like there were still things she wanted me to carry for her. Then she nodded and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like any other stranger. I stood there for a moment, letting the finality settle in. Not sharp. Not heavy. Just real. The message from her ex hadn't ended my marriage. It had ended my confusion. It showed me where I stood when honesty arrived uninvited. It showed me how much silence can say when you stop filling it with excuses. And it taught me that walking away doesn't always look like leaving. Sometimes, it looks like staying still while everything else moves on without you. If this story resonated, if you've ever chosen clarity over chaos, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who's standing at that same quiet crossroads. The next story goes even deeper.